Cruella De Vil, Cruella De Vil. If she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will. Too serious to take a certain chill. Cruella, Cruella De Vil. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video, we are doing that final part to Simplicity 9342, which is the Cruella De Vil jacket. We finally made it there. Yes. Now, before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this video. So this video is the final part where we will be sewing together the lining. Now, I'm not walking you through the entire process of sewing the lining because it is exactly the same as sewing in part 1 and 2. So you could go back to those videos and watch that in order to construct the lining. However, I will be showing you how to sew the upper collar and attach it to the lining, as well as attach the lining to the jacket and finish off your sleeves in this video. Yes, so let's go ahead and get right on into this video. All right, so welcome back to the last part of the Cruella De Vil jacket. It's been a lot, these last few parts. And in this part, we will be finishing up with the upper collar, the lining. We're gonna bag our lining, and then we'll be done with our jacket. So what we did last time was the sleeve band, the under collar, and then I did the sleeve heading. So let me show you the jacket now. All right, so this is what the jacket is looking like so far from the last part that we just finished doing. So this is what the jacket's looking like. Go ahead and move your jacket out of the way. And the next thing we're going to do is the upper collar. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 4. And what we're gonna do is, with right sides together, you're going to pin at the center back seams. So I'm just gonna turn it this way. And with right sides together, you should have 3 notches. So go ahead and pin at the notch, pin at the bottom, and then pin at the top. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and pressed my upper collar with right sides together, I sewn my upper collar and then I pressed it open. Go ahead and move your upper collar off to the side. Now, I have already done my lining section, or the lining portion, and I'm not gonna walk you through this step because it's exactly like sewing the main outer shell. So I'm just going to tell you what I did. You can also go back to part 1 in order to see the steps that I took to construct the lining. So the first thing is, for the lining, you will attach the side front to the facing. Now this portion right here is the facing. So you attach the side front to the facing, both of those. Once you do that, you attach the front facing and the side front at the shoulder seam to the back. Now before you do that, make sure you make your pleats in the back right here. So you're gonna make sure that you go ahead and stay stitch the upper edge of the back at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, make your pleat, and then attach the shoulders of the front to the back. Stitch across 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do that, you're gonna go ahead and pin the side seams. Now, you want to, when you pin your side seams, right sides together, I'm gonna show you this. Looking at it on the left side, you wanna sew all the way down. On the opposite side, on the right side, you wanna leave an opening for you to turn your jacket out. Once you do that, you will attach the sleeves the same way I did for the main fabric. Attach your sleeves. The only difference is you will not be inserting a sleeve heading in your lining. You don't need to do that. Just sew your sleeves as normal. Once you do that, make sure when you sew your sleeve, you leave a 3-inch opening on both sleeves in order to finish off your sleeves. So I'm gonna recap. Make sure you leave a 3-inch opening on one of your side seams, preferably on the right-hand side. Make sure you leave an opening on both sleeves, 3 inches. All right, so now that I went ahead and explained the lining, you can always go back to the first video to see how I put all of the first part together. It's the same thing, no difference. The only difference is leaving an opening at the side seam and on the sleeves. All right, so now that I went ahead and told you how I did the lining, go ahead and grab your upper collar. And with right sides together, we're going to pin the upper collar the same way we did for the under collar for our main fabric. So you're going to pin at the center back seam. You're going to pin at your notches and your dots and pin all the way across as well. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar pinned to my lining section with right sides together, go to the sewing machine using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're gonna backstitch at the beginning. You're gonna backstitch at the beginning, starting at the center backstitch at the beginning and sew to one side. So what you're going to do is start at the center back seam, sew all the way to that dot where you have that clipping for, and then I did not pin it, but you need to pin at that notch and sew all the way to that last dot right here. Make sure you stitch all the way to that dot and back stitch to secure it. You're going to turn it over to the other side and do the exact same thing. If you don't remember how to do that, go back to part 1 in order to see that. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar sewn onto my lining section, go ahead and grab your jacket. Now I'm going to put my jacket down on the table with right sides up, okay, facing me. And then I'm going to put my lining right on top of my jacket like this, okay? And what you want to do is you're going to pin all of it together, okay? However, I'm going to pin the center back seam of my upper and lower collar first. And then I'm going to just pin all the way around. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead and pinned all the way around my jacket. Now I want to mention how I'm going to sew this together. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna start at the center back seam. I'm gonna sew all the way to this dot right here and back stitch, break my threads. I'm gonna sew from this dot. So basically it's going to be, now you're not gonna sew with it open. You're gonna have your seam down and you're gonna sew all the way to this dot and stop at this dot. Once you stop at this dot, break your seam, you're going to move both of your seam allowance up and then start back at that dot and sew all the way around the front portion of your jacket until you reach the bottom. Now I'm not going across yet, I'm just going to sew to this first seam line, which is your side seam. Once I do that, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna turn it over, come back to the center back seam of my upper and lower collar. I'm gonna sew the opposite direction, get to that dot where my seam allowance is down, get to that dot, back stitch, break my threads, push my seam allowance, that's both seam allowance up, start back at that dot and sew around the front portion of my jacket to that, that's not the side seam, that is the front and side front seam. So let me make myself a correction. That is the side front and front seam, okay? So go ahead to the sewing machine using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and stitched my upper collar to my under collar, I also attached at the front as well, the lining to the jacket. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and attach the bottom now, because now that I have sewn all the way to the side front, attach the side front to the front, now I'm going to go ahead and attach at the very bottom hem area. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, pinning with right sides together, making sure I match up all of my seams as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it out through the opening in the lining. So go ahead and do that now. And make sure you use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew the bottom edge together. All right, so now that I have sewn my bottom seam right here, I have sewn that closed at the bottom. Now what I'm gonna do is go ahead and pull my jacket out through this opening. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my jacket pulled all the way through, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go in and poke out all my corners. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so this is what the jacket is looking like so far. Of course, I need to give it a little press into shape, and you know, in order to get it to lay and fit the way I want it to look. So far, this is what it's looking like. Now, what you need to do is get your pattern piece and find where your waistline is. Once you do that, do not close this opening at the side. You need to understitch from the waist down all the way around on both sides. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that we have the lining, you know, done or whatever, we turned it right side out. The only thing that you have to do is go ahead and finish off your lining first. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to turn in the seam allowance of the lining, which is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you're going to match it up to the seam allowance here on your, so you're gonna take your lining, fold it in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you're going to meet that seam like this and hold it. But you want to turn it out through, you're gonna pin really, but I'm just not pinning. You're gonna turn both out through the opening in the sleeves. So when you turn it out through the opening in the sleeves, it's going to look like this, okay? And then all you have to do is where you had that seam allowance, hold it all the way around, do not let it go. And then you're just going to make sure that you're lining up the seam allowance, right? You fix it all the way around. Make sure the seam allowance is matching up, and you're going to pin all the way around, okay? Once you do that, all you're going to do after you pin all the way around, you're gonna sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Sew both of your linings, the sleeve linings, to your sleeve on both sides. Turn it right side out through the opening and give it a good press. Then you're going to make sure that you slip stitch, or if you want, you can just go to your sewing machine and sew that sleeve, that underarm seam to your sleeve closed, and also sew your side seam closed as well. Once you do that, give your jacket a good press, and you are all done with your jacket. All right, so now that I have it pinned all the way around, like I said, go to your sewing machine using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure that this stay free and you don't accidentally sew it. Start at your underarm seams, which is right here. Sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew all the way around on both both sleeves. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the sleeve lining attached to the sleeve right here, this is the inside of my jacket. All that's left for me to do is go ahead and slip stitch. I will be slip stitching mine closed instead of using the sewing machine. But if you want to use the sewing machine, you can go ahead and pin like so. And just sew as close to the edge as possible, about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. I would say about 1/8 of an inch to close that seam up on both underarm seams. And then you also need to close out the side seam, this hole right here. Same thing, I'm slip stitching mine's closed, but you can go to the sewing machine and sew this seam closed as well. Once you do that, you are all done with your jacket. Cruella De Vil, Cruella De Vil, if she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will. Too serious to take a certain chill. Cruella, Cruella De Vil. So there you have it. That is part 3 and the final part of our Cruella De Vil jacket. I hope you I hope you sew this jacket together. If you do, tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. And I just love this jacket and how it came out, the tie, the white button down shirt. I love this look. So stay tuned for more photos and also a sneak peek of the next sew along as well. So until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. And as always, keep sewing.